Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the all-new Mysteries and Oddities video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one also suggested in the past, and I know that I've talked about it before, but it was mainly more like an entry within one of the later parts of one of my past videos. So now I get to finally re-review this information again and present it in its whole entirety. In other words, dedicated video just exclusively to this. And what's fascinating is I just talked about the most mysterious song on the internet. Well, here has to do with a mysterious game. One, in fact, that's been considered the most fascinating game that never was. And you'll hear all about the information here in a minute. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of it now. It goes by one name exclusively. Those of you that are big fans of video games know exactly what it leads to. But it's known as this. It's known as Polybius. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info tied to this very, very infamous video game. So what is this Polybius? Well, again, it's often been referred to as the game that never was, one of the most fascinating games on the internet, and then also one of the mysterious games on the internet. Lots of interpretations for it in terms of its origins, nothing in terms of, let's say, things being concrete. One person will state one thing and then another person will state another thing. So when I was reading a lot of this information, there's definitely lots of angles to go by. But that's usually the thing associated with these type of mysterious artifacts. Like, no one really knows the true answer. I'm just going to present what I guess is the most common basis in terms of its origin. But here's how it goes. Apparently, sometime in 1981, specifically in Portland, Oregon, that's when somewhere there in some area, some suburb, there was an all-new arcade game that was introduced that looked something like this. Again, no idea as to where it was specifically, the dates or anything like that, or how it even got there. But all of a sudden, there was this video game, this arcade that was there. And then, of course, this was the early 1980s, going into the mid-80s. So here you have arcades that are definitely popular, definitely getting a lot of coin play and a lot of people interested in these kind of things. But the way the story goes is this game became very, very popular in of itself, almost to being the point of straight up addiction. There was a line always associated with this game. It would wrap around, let's say, the outside of the store. People would want to play it and play it. No matter how much they played it, they wanted to continue playing it even more, so much so that there were even fights associated with who was next on this game. And no one knew, again, how it came to be there. It just suddenly popped up in this place, and then all of a sudden it had all this popularity. But as players were making this game, making the rounds associated with it, that's when it turned a different angle. There were these unpleasant side effects that started to come from this gameplay. Players would state that afterward they would have almost these, quote, psychoactive effects, which included amnesia, night terrors, hallucinations, and then also insomnia. And this was, again, something very, very just unusual when it comes to arcade games. Nobody expects that kind of stuff, right? Whenever you're playing, let's say, Street Fighter or any of the other classic arcade games out there. But lo and behold, once it was released, there was another set of mysterious things that people would state. All of a sudden, people that were, let's say, looking more like government agents or maybe even the infamous Men in Black, they would come over to this area, frequently look at the game, frequently take it away and then bring it back. It was almost like they were doing something purposeful with it, like finding out results or finding out information as far as that gameplay. And then when it came back, it would just start the whole series over again. I don't know if there was any further information as to what eventually happened to this mysterious arcade game. Like, in other words, if it was taken away at a certain date and then just never returned, or if it's still there to this day, although I highly doubt it, because again, somebody would truly showcase that existence as of today, especially with the social media that's out there. But somewhere along the way, this arcade game just went away, but it definitely left its hallmark. This Polybius became a sensation of its own there. It caused all these weird side effects in players. People would again see all these strange government officials snooping around it, and then it was gone afterward. And that was it. That was pretty much it associated with Polybius. I don't think there were other entries too, like let's say other locations tied to it, because this one again took place in Portland, Oregon, and I didn't really find anything as far as, let's say, anywhere in New York or Texas, Florida, anything like that. It seemed to be right there at that one spot, and then that was it, kind of like highlighting its rarity as well. Plus, this was again the early 1980s. There was nothing in terms of internet, nothing that people would just communicate with one another in terms of showcasing like more information on it. So that's why it remains so rare and so mysterious to this very day. In fact, the very first known instance as to what this game was and how it grew in terms of its legend happened in 1994, one of the earliest known days, of course, on the internet side with Usenet. And from there, word just kind of spread in of itself. There was an article at coinup.org that presented an image of its supposed entry, like in terms of its like whenever you log on to the game, you put in your quarter, that's the first thing that shows up, which you're looking at now. And then that where they stated more information about the game being called Polybius, and that it had a copyright date of 1981, and that there was more information as well later on as far as who created it in terms of ROM information, and then also tips that were coming along with other magazines like GamePro as well. In fact, there was an issue of GamePro in 2003 that featured more information on it. They had an article of it called Secrets and Lies, and they in turn started to spread more of that legend because GamePro clearly was a very popular magazine, and so that's where it reached a very large amount of mass audiences all at once. But still, nobody had a direct knowledge, nobody had that smoking gun as to what occurred with the game, what happened when it got there, and so on. So it still remains somewhat elusive, somewhat mysterious, and then that was it. What's interesting, though, is that there was an attempt, an official attempt, since, again, this involved stuff in with legends associated with people seeing strange, government men all huddling towards this game console, and again retrieving it and then bringing it back. There was an attempt with the FBI, some Freedom of Information Act, to try to get something in terms of a concrete answer, one of those final answers from a government institution on an official letterhead and so forth. And that's what you're looking at here. This Freedom of Information Act was done, and it showcases the info that was presented by whoever was responding to, or whoever had input the inquiry. Obviously, it's blacked out, so you can't really see who it's from, but you'll see the official request number and then a subject matter associated with it as Polybius arcade game. And there it is. That's where the FBI stated that they concluded a research of the central record systems, and their quote is unable to identify any file records responsive to that request. So that is as close as possible when it comes to any official matter to Polybius and where it came from, its existence, and so on. According at least to the FBI, there is absolutely nothing record, no association tied to Polybius in any manner whatsoever. I imagine too that people have looked into trademarks and looking into anything involving arcade games. Like, you can't just introduce an arcade game as is. You obviously have to file it somewhere. You have to introduce it with a trademark. You have to go through the process of getting copyrights and then getting the servers and all that. I imagine that people were trying to find the history of it, but nobody has either way. Somewhere along the past, there was this supposed game that happened, and then it just grew, but nobody again has able to get that final image, something that showcases 100% proof that this game truly existed. What's interesting too is that there was at least an attempt, like there was a theory as to what occurred, and here's apparently what happened. So back in 1981, yes, there were some players that fell ill due to some of the gameplay that they were doing, but it had nothing to do with Polybius. The way the story goes is that one of them was experiencing some kind of problems because they were playing for 28 hours straight on a game called Asteroids. Very popular game, obviously, way back when. So they were trying to create a record associated with it. Another one was playing another game called Tempest, and I think that was also on a record marathon. Either way, though, that one of them collapsed with a migraine, the other one had the stomach pain, and then that was that. But as it turns out, a couple of days later, at that very same, I believe, location that the players were trying to break their records at the arcade, that's when the FBI actually went in, not because they were doing anything involving stuff associated with those games, but because they were actually trying to stop another thing. As it turns out, that area apparently had gambling machines. Those are the ones that are Could be related to slot machines or something else entirely different. Either way, though, they were there to monitor and look what's going on. They must have gotten indications or tips that someone was running illegal gambling there. And so when they showed up and then they tried to, see what was going on and take some machines here and there, people must have tried to add 2 plus 2. Here you had these players that were getting sick from these games and having these ill side effects. And then here you had the FBI agents a couple of days later raiding that location. And then people thought, oh my goodness, there's a conspiracy, there's something else happening. And that is where this urban legend almost grew from there. That's when the mysteriousness tied to it, the myth associated with it, grew. And as it happens, a couple of years later, there was that very famous movie, its cult following of its own, called The Last Starfighter, which again had to do with a teenager, someone who plays a video game, but then his high score catches the attention of aliens out there because they're trying to recruit people. And so that popularity of that movie kind of added more to the flame when it came to this type of story associated with Polybius. So I can totally see when I was reading all that information how the things added up. It definitely made sense. I think it's more along those angles. I truly don't think Polybius ever really existed. It was just something that dawned during the early age of the internet, one of those email chain nets that just grew and then went kind of viral in the sense that it was back then. And then, of course, with the stories associated with players falling sick from playing too much, the FBI raids, the internet days, and then also the movie Last Starfighter, I can totally see how that could be. Interesting link too on one last part. There was another video game that used a laser disc, something called Cube Quest. And then this one, because it was so new at its time, it constantly required repairs. And so that's why there was a lot of people that were there visiting it, doing maintenance on it. And people were thinking, again, this must be tied to Polybius. This must be tied to something else in terms of information being gathered for the infamous purpose of trying to recruit players, something along those lines based on their high scores. Again, fascinating stuff reading all this information, and it just continues to grow from there. But in a way of life imitating art and art imitating life, Polybius has been referenced in many things. You're seeing now, for example, as far as The Simpsons, it's definitely mentioned it there. And then also there is a Polybius game out there. It's on Steam right now. You're looking at it at this moment, in fact, and this is a game that you can purchase there, and it's almost like a tongue-in-cheek reference to what Polybius would have been, because obviously you can see the graphics on it mimic many of the early 1980s games, but let's say upgraded to what we have today. But still, it looks like it's retro, like it has those neat laser effects and the simple graphics tied to it. So again, it's not the real game in of itself, but it's supposed to represent what Polybius would have been, and all the urban legends and everything else, the mysteriousness tied to it, as far as trying to get high scores and then get FBI agents and other government agents noting who has those high scores based on the visuals and what you do with the game here. But fascinating stuff all around. Again, Polybius, one of the most famous games that never was. So if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please let me know. I've seen plenty of mock-ups online now, looking at the images of people dedicating, there's a following to it, people dedicating real arcade games to it, taking mock-ups of older arcade consoles and then making them and modifying to show Polybius. I wonder who even made that logo in the beginning, because that is a pretty interesting logo and it does stand out. So again, if anyone has any more information on this that I might have missed, please post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.